This is Horum with Horum's Quorum. My guest today is Moez Kaba, the managing partner of the elite trial firm Hueston Hennigan. Moez's father drove a cab, and now Moez is one of the most sought after trial lawyers in the country, and he's only 42. We went deep into his trial techniques and the principles that have shaped his career. Here's Moez.
It's great to continue this conversation. I've really enjoyed getting to know you. And I think this episode is, it's going to be a banger. I have to say that.
Well, you have a lot of confidence in me. So I hope to be able to live up to at least 25% of your expectation.
Okay. So we started, you shared an anecdote last time, and I think of all the things we talked about, I think that's the anecdote that I keep coming back to because I think it's such a fascinating, pivotal moment in your career. And I imagine you would have had a lot of success in some other version of it. But this version and the path that this one took is really fascinating. So, you made a decision about which firm to join in law school based on a conversation you had on the subway. So can you tell that story?
Yeah, sure. It's an interesting anecdote about the role that serendipity plays in one's life, even perhaps in some respects, even more than talent or skill or just plain hard work. So when I was in law school, I was studying at Columbia Law School, and I was a fresh-faced law student. And no one in my family had ever gone to college, much less law school. I didn't know any lawyers. I had no relationships upon which to rely as one kind of navigates the law school and post-law school world. And I recall I was born and raised in Chicago, and I had an offer from a law firm for the summer in Chicago, a firm that I thought was great for exactly one reason, which is they paid more money than I'd ever seen in my life before per week. And I thought, my God, why would they want? If they want to give me money and I can just go back to Chicago, I guess that's what I'm going to do. I also happened to have had an interview and an offer from another firm. That firm was in New York. And I had not heard anything about this firm. I didn't know anything about this firm. But I was talking to a friend when I was going down. I was taking the train from 116th Street downtown. And I was saying, oh, yeah, I think I'm going to go to this Chicago firm. I did just get an offer from this other firm. It's a New York firm. And, they pay a little bit more than the Chicago firm, but like, what's the difference? And I said to my friends, like, oh, what is that firm? And I said, oh, they're called Wachtell Lipton. And I think they're in Midtown. And this other law student, no idea who he was. I don't think I caught his name. He says to me, at that subway stop, he's like, if you have an offer from Wachtell Lipton to go work there for the summer, that is the firm you need to go work at. And then he gave me a little bit of information about what the firm was and kind of their claim to fame. And entirely on that basis, 100% on the basis of this stranger who seemed to know something about the law firm world, and certainly more than I did, said that's where I should go work. And that's in fact where I wanted to work. So I summered there. I ultimately, I had a clerkship. I ultimately went back and began my legal career, at that firm. And, the rest is history, as they say.
So you don't know who that student was?
No idea. He was, I know he was a 3L.
Sure. That makes sense. That'd be really weird. If it's a 1L telling you, hey,
yeah.
Well, okay. So let's say you run into this guy, you're a Columbia alumni event, and this is not implausible. You run into the guy. What are you going to say to him today?
First of all, I'm going to say he looks great despite the passage of time, because that's a nice thing to say to him.
Yep. Always good.
It's always good to start by saying something nice about people that feels validating for them. The interesting thing about it is, I think that it's a lesson in being bold in some ways. He didn't know who I was, and I could have had a very negative reaction to some guy giving me unsolicited career advice. But in doing that, I thought in him doing that, he really unknowingly in many respects kind of changed the trajectory of my post law school career. I mean, I very well could be sitting in Chicago today, working at a law firm in Chicago. Many wonderful law firms in Chicago, by the way. Many.
Thanks for the qualification. Somebody practiced in Chicago. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I bet you if I named the firm that I was thinking about going, you would not be able to recognize it because it's not one of the kind of the premier firms that we often associate with the great city of Chicago. But my point being, like, that one kind of unsolicited little piece of advice he offered me for which he had no reason to do, really, I think had such a great impact on me. And so I would probably just tell him the story, and I don't think he would realize what he did. And my suspicion, a strong one at that, is he would probably look at me and say, "Who are you, and why are you talking to me?"
Right. Okay. So you mentioned serendipity, you mentioned boldness. How do you feel like you've incorporated that premise of boldness? What over time, you're so new and still trying to figure things out. And then over time, I'm assuming you got bolder and bolder over time. So like, tell me about that virtue over time for you.
Oh, sure. I think that a large part of kind of going, a large part of my success has been traversing kind of uncharted terrain, at least uncharted for me, personally. I have, said this before. My dad was a cab driver. My parents were undocumented for a large part of my early life. They came over here from Pakistan and overstayed their visa, and then ultimately got amnesty in 1986. So I didn't really have an obvious pathway to get from basically high school through like a professional career. And I think that, I think you have to be bold in so many different steps of your life, as you're trying to achieve something worthy of, South Asian. So like one of the things you often think about is worthy of your family's name, or, your father and grandfather's legacy, which sounds more patriarchal than I intended to be. But look, whether it was even the decision to go to college was something that could be perceived as bold. In fact, it was by my high school college counselor, who told me that I shouldn't go to college. I should go to a vocational school. And then to go on to law school, I picked New York. I picked a law school in New York City because it's a city that I'd always admired, never been to go clerking, to go do a clerkship, which was something that I'd not really understood the value of until I did it. People were said in law school, if you can get a clerkship, you should go clerk. And I thought, okay, that's what I should do then. Obviously, coming back to New York, going to Wachtell, but even ultimately starting the firm that we started now almost 10 years ago, Hueston Hennigan, was a bold move. I mean, we were a group of partners at a well-established firm. And I just made partner, a year earlier. But there was a group of really outstanding lawyers and mentors and people I admired who wanted us, kind of go off on our own and see if we could create something new, which is what we did when we launched our firm. So I tried to incorporate in my own personal development, just this being bold, taking risks, believing in yourself and believing in people around you. And I think that's worked out, so far, so good. But of course, there's aspects of being bold that are incredibly important as a trial lawyer. Finding your voice in front of a judge or a jury is probably one of the most important things that you can have as a trial lawyer. And then using that voice to compellingly tell your client's story in ways that are simple and understandable and to some extent relatable, regardless of how complex the case may be, I think comes from being bold and confident in your skills.
So I wonder if, I don't know if you see it this way, but it's the fact that, none of this was ever going to be from the path you're on. This is the land of opportunity. So this is where this can happen, but can doesn't mean it's feasible. So nothing about this path that you've obtained, that you've gone on and achieved was likely to happen given the constraints you're operating under. So do you feel like there's a possibility that the fact that you didn't even know what wasn't possible made you bolder? Like, I didn't even know that I couldn't do that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's this really interesting phenomenon where I think you can think to yourself, like, I don't see anyone that looks like me in this position. And you can think to yourself, maybe I don't belong in that position. Or you can think to yourself, wow, that means there's room for me in that position. And I have tended to be the latter rather than the former. And yeah, I mean, it's been perhaps like a foolish level of confidence. But from my perspective, I've always thought it's important that, you know, we as lawyers, we as people, we as first generation Americans or the children of immigrants or whatever we may be, have a lot of confidence in creating the space for us, for ourselves. And then in occupying that space, never believing that there are only a certain number of seats at the table. And you have to displace the other person that's at that table. You just pull up your chair, but just add something of value. I think it's really important. And I think that it's what I view as part of my job, in my role as managing partner at my law firm, and just as kind of someone who's now practiced law for a while, is to continue adding seats to that table and filling it with other people who are worthy and who are diverse and who bring their own perspective and life experiences to the practice.
Mm-hmm. Can we go back to, I think part of that story on the subway, an obvious part is the serendipity aspect. What do you see as another serendipitous but like inflection point in your career?
I guess the way I got to this group of lawyers that where we launched our firm, with whom I launched our firm, Hueston Hennigan, was itself in some respects serendipitous. So let me be clear, like, despite my feeling like, oh, I can fill that space because I don't see anybody else there, and I'm fully aware that luck has played a huge part in my career. There are so many talented lawyers out there. There are many talented trial lawyers out there. There are many talented South Asian lawyers out there. But a little bit of the right place at the right time, I think, has always kind of been in my favor. And I remember back when I was at my old firm as an associate, one of my partners today called me and said, "Hey, I'm working on this case with another partner here." And the partner that called me, his name is Marshall Camp, and the other partner he was working with, his name is John Houston, who's one of the named partners at our firm. And Marshall said to me, like, "You've never worked with John, but like, this is an interesting case. You should work on it." And I said, "Oh, okay. Yeah, that sounds great. I'll make time to work on it." John then called me and said, "Oh, I'm like looking forward to working with you. By the way, there's a deposition on Thursday of the key expert of the other side. Like, can you fly out and do that?" And I did it. That case went to trial. I got trial witness, I did trial witnesses at that trial. We won that trial. It was a very profile trial, and kind of all of those pieces all fit together. I continued working with that group a lot more. We continued taking cases to trial together. All of that worked out for me because of two things. Because Marshall decided to give me a call that day. I happened to pick up the phone that day, and I happened to decide, yeah, I'll make time to do this, despite working on, some other matters at that time. And so in part, right, that's being at the right place at the right time. In part, it's a product of being willing to just say yes and do the work. And again, making yourself available to say, I can handle this along with all of the other things I'm doing. And that, I really believe that trial, it was a federal jury trial, a month-long federal jury trial in the Southern District of New York that we won, had it was sort of in a kind of a key anchor of my kind of growth and development as a trial lawyer, and working with the people that I worked with in that case, who I continue to work with today, now, almost 15 years later.
What was different about that work environment compared to your previous work environments?
There was a lot of friendship in that trial team. So trials are just these incredibly intense and testing environments. And it is so important when you go to trial that you go to trial with people that you trust and that I believe that you like. And that is part of what makes our firm really special, because we go to trial a lot and we also like each other a lot and we trust each other and we know that we're going to have each other's backs. And we know that, if I'm examining a key witness, I can talk to my colleagues and they'll give me great ideas to make that examination go really well. Like, you're all rowing on the same boat in the same direction and you're taking turns kind of putting in the hardest work. And that environment, that trial, was just like a wonderful example of that. And I was an associate. Like, at that time, I wasn't a partner. There were multiple partners on that case. I was an associate. But every key witness, every key decision, every key motion, we talked about it together. And I was just entrusted to handle, multiple trial witnesses. I started off that case with 3 trial witnesses, and ultimately during the trial got 2 more added. It just became this really wonderful thing where you prove yourself, you get to prove yourself some more. But it was in an environment not where I felt like I was, constantly being kind of put into tough spots. It was an environment where I felt like the team is with me and they're going to help me and they're going to support me. And they're going to make my examinations the best examinations possible. They're going to make my arguments, they're going to push me on my arguments and make sure I really crystallize the legal and factual issues I want to present to the court. So that was just a really wonderful trial experience. And it was a really wonderful way for me to learn about these new people who, like I said, I've now been working with for 15 years.
Mm-hmm. And so how many trials do you think you've had at this point?
I think a dozen or so, give or take.
And how many of them have been lead trial counsel?
Just in the last 2 years, it's been like 6 or 7 actually in the last 2.5 years. But the vast majority of them. And the way we practice is we typically have 2 lead trial counsels in our cases. And so all of the trials that I've had in the last, 2, 3, 4 years, I've been me and another one of our partners have been the lead trial counsel.
Wait, so let me make sure I got this right. So the total number of trials that you've been to have been about 12. And so basically half of all the trials you've ever done have been in the past few years.
Yes.
That seems remarkable.
If you ask my husband, it certainly does, since I also happen to have a 5-year-old son. And so, he has done a lot of the heavy lifting on the parenting front. But yeah, so, one thing to keep in mind is when we launched Hueston Hennigan, we launched it because we wanted to take on those cases that have a higher yield to trial. Mm-hmm. And so that a product of that is going to trial a lot more. I mean, this year, we're in March. I have trials scheduled for May, July, September, October, November, and December. That's for this year. And we'll see. And trials are being scheduled already for next year. And so that's kind of our practice. And that's what we love that. We thrive on that. And that's the kind of people we attract to practice at our firm, is those people who want to be in that environment, working kind of shoulder to shoulder at 2 a.m., trying to come up with that last key cross-examination question that's going to be the mic drop moment.
Well, I can tell that you get just from your bio language, you can tell you're very energized. As somebody else, another lawyer, maybe even a trial lawyer, if they call themselves that might just kind of have some sort of, some dejection or something like that and describing that trajectory. But I can tell you're excited about it. And you mentioned cross-examination. Do you feel like that's the focal point? Do you feel like that's the thing you really hone in on a trial? Like, is that where you feel like you really show your merit? Like, or is that just a random example, or is that really what you kind of hone in on in the trial?
No, it is kind of random, but it's one of like my favorite things to do. So there are, I like all of the aspects of trial, right? I love giving the opening. I love having my witnesses, putting on my witnesses so that they can kind of really give life to the case and give life to our position. I love closings, but I think cross-examinations are really fun. And you really are, it is your moment to really, show the jury that even the other side's witnesses are supporting your part of the case. I feel like with a great cross-examination, you can win or lose a case, with a great cross-examination. And I think that's just a fun, and it's challenging. It's the thing you have the least control over, right? Like when I deliver an opening, I know what the opening is going to be. I've put it together with my team, like my team and I have put it together. When I do a closing, or when any of us that does a closing at a trial, we know more or less. It's in a more compressed time frame, but you know what you're going to say. No one is interrupting you. When you're doing your direct examination of a witness, like any trial lawyer worth their salt knows exactly what's going to be happening. Cross-examinations, you don't have any of that. There is no safety net. Your safety net is like your wit, how quickly you can turn, maybe an unexpected answer, in your favor, and how good and tight your impeachment is. And so that's really, that's fun. And some of my kind of fondest memories, of my trials have been cross-examinations.
Which trial that you've been a part of, do you find yourself like revisiting again and again? Like, what's the trial that you keep on thinking about again and again over the years?
I think about all of them, really. I mean, like, I feel like I learn something in every trial, and I learn it from the jury, or I learn something from my colleagues or from the judge. We've had some really great judges that we've been really lucky to try cases in front of. But one of the ones that comes to mind a lot, though, is a defense side case that we did, for a pharmaceutical company, that was accused of fueling, not my words, but fueling the opioid epidemic. And we, the plaintiffs, which were various municipalities in the state of California, were suing for in the neighborhood of $50 billion with a B. And it was our client and then 3 other pharmaceutical companies, and each pharmaceutical company had its own counsel. And we were representing our client, in a case that, essentially everyone said the pharmaceutical companies are going to lose, because all of the defendants were losing these cases all over the country. And we took our case to trial. We had a client who really believed in us and believed in our ability to kind of reveal the truth, the factual truth, but also the legal framework that was appropriate for considering these sorts of cases. And we won that trial. That was a 3-month trial. And at the end of it, we won. And I think it's still the only, or one of the only, defense side verdicts for pharmaceutical companies in the sprawling many thousands of opioid addiction cases that were filed. And that was a very challenging case, and it was a tough trial. It was taxing because of its length. It was the number of witnesses, the amount of paper, the significance of the issues. But it was as a trial lawyer, the way we got to put on that case was really, I thought was a great lesson in winning a particularly tough case, tough on the facts and tough on the law.
What's like the moment though that you keep on replaying? Like, is there some moment, maybe it's not from that trial, but a trial, like, is there
Oh yeah, there was, yeah. I I cross-examined the government's, the plaintiffs, the people of the state of California, that is, their key witness, who was an expert on addiction. I crossed her. She had been on the stand for quite a long time and kind of, repeating and emphasizing and substantiating the points that the government had been making throughout this months-long trial. She was a very highly regarded expert, a very highly regarded addiction specialist. And I sort of methodically, at least with respect to my client, we kind of methodically undermined all of her opinions about our client. And we ended that cross-examination, and I get credit for it because I'm the guy who got to ask the questions, but it was really a team of wonderful lawyers that I work with who kind of, put it all together. But I ended that cross-examination, by, asking her, whether she would agree with me that everything she has just described about the ills of opioid medications, we should take with a grain of salt because she's an addiction specialist. And so her opinions are necessarily biased because she only sees the people that have the problems, but not people who have the benefits of opioids. And you can imagine that her, like any expert, would be totally taken aback by that and say, what are you talking about? I'm not biased. I'm presenting the fact. I'm presenting the science, which was her response. She said, I'm not biased at all. At which point, what we had done is we had unearthed a clip of her on another podcast, actually, Fresh Air, where she was interviewed by Terry Gross while she was promoting a book. And Terry Gross had asked her this very question, which is, because you are an addiction specialist and you only see people who are addicted and not people who benefit, wouldn't you agree that you are biased? And her response to that was, ha ha ha, I'm totally biased. And that, I replay that because there are so many lessons from that one exchange, including the fact that it was kind of the cherry on top of a cross-examination that completely undermined her opinions. It's not just like substantively helpful, but it's also helpful just because it's such obvious impeachment of something that you just said. But there are other lessons about that from the perspective of being a trial lawyer, which is you have to know when to sit down. And after I said, please play the clip, that was it. I smiled. I said, thank you for your time. I have no further questions. And I sat down. And that was a lasting impression of that exam. And then the other lesson in all of that is also you have to know when you are thinking of cases like a trial lawyer, you are not planning for summary judgment, right? You obviously, if you can get summary judgment, you should try to get it. But you're always thinking about the trial. What am I going to say when I'm in front of the fact finder? And how am I going to have the most impact? And that was an example of something that we deliberately held back from deposition so that no one would be prepared for it. Even my client wasn't prepared for it. My client, after we got off, the client was obviously very happy, but the client was like, I was so nervous. I was like, where's he going? Of course, she's not going to answer this question. But then they said, but we had so much trust that we knew that you knew exactly where you were going. But it's an example of kind of the perspective you bring to cases is a little bit different when you're thinking about, like, at the end of the day, I'm standing in front of somebody and that person's under oath and there's somebody or some group of people that are going to be making a decision live about that person's credibility.
Yeah, I love that example. And I love the technique because by definition, it's not something opposing counsel can plan for. If there's something you're holding back, you just can't know what they're holding back.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it was interesting because in that case, we had great, very, very, very good, very talented opposing counsel. And they were grasping. They got up and they said, they say to the expert, well, Mr. Kaba didn't play the rest of that clip, did he? That was the response. Of course, I know I love the rest of the clip. I wanted to play the rest of the clip, but it wasn't as punchy as I wanted to end with a punch, right? I didn't want to end with a monologue. And so they said, Your Honor, we want to play the rest of the clip. And I got up and smiled. I said, no objection. And the rest of the clip was her saying, yes, for many people, opioid medications are incredibly helpful. Like it was literally the point we were making. And so it is, you don't look, it doesn't happen in every case, but you try to find these opportunities in your cases to kind of outwit, out lawyer, out persuade the other side. And that was an example in that case, which, like I said, everybody was essentially writing everybody's writing the story about how they lost it.
Right.
That everybody turned around and had to write the story of how they won it.
Yeah. Did you have the impression the opposing counsel was already familiar with that interview?
Not at all.
Yeah. So they just totally winged it and thought, I'll roll the dice and maybe there's something favorable here. Okay.
Yeah. I'm sure they quickly tried to listen to it.
Sure.
And said, it was cut off, because a lot of people's natural instinct on things. And I see this a fair bit at trial too, where, you'll read an excerpt of a Q&A from a deposition to impeach the witness. And a lot of people's natural excerpts like, Your Honor, they should read the full response, because it's like instinctive. You feel like I've got to say something. And sometimes you're better off saying nothing. You're better off just letting it be, because sometimes the full response is worse for you than just the part that was excerpted.
Mm-hmm. How about, have you been on the other side of that equation where you've had somebody, had posed a challenging question on cross, and then you had to redirect and you feel like you resuscitated the point?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that we try to do, this is like turning into kind of trying cases, the Hueston Hennigan style, I guess. But one of the things we really try to do with our direct witnesses is we try to cross them harder than they will ever be crossed at trial. So that takes a lot of work, and it requires, the best. I always tell people the best compliment that our team gets after preparing a witness for trial is when they get off the stand and they're like, wow, you guys were much tougher. We love that. And so a part of that is you try to predict where the other side is going to go. And then you have redirect ready for when the other side goes there. And sometimes, lucky for us, like, we work very hard at that to make it work. And look, sometimes it does. Sometimes you just have something bad that you just have to take. You have to own it as a witness. You have to accept it, but then you have to explain why it doesn't matter for the purposes of this case. And that's the better approach. The better approach is not, you don't want to seem evasive, and you don't want to lose credibility in front of the jury. So sometimes you take it in the chin, but you help the jury see, but it's not a knockout.
It's funny. I'm just realizing somebody on LinkedIn had posed a question recently, like, what's something you've learned as a lawyer that you use in everyday life? And just as you say there now, I didn't have a good answer for it then. I'm like, I couldn't think of a good example. I know that there's going to be several things, but now I realize what I do is I say, just in everyday life, I just say, let's assume that's true, even if that's true, and then you proceed. It's just, or whatever. Yeah. So that's a cool technique.
Yeah. I also just think it goes the other way too, right? Like, what's something that you hold true to for everyday life that applies?
Ooh, that's a good one.
More force as a lawyer. And I think, like, having integrity and credibility really matters. And one of the things that I often think about and we talk about here is there are basically three people that the jury sees throughout an entire trial. It's the judge, it's you, and it's the lawyer on the other side. And as much as the credibility for the witness matters, the witness is maybe on the stand for a day, right? In a month-long trial. The jury sees you every day. And so every day, you've got to earn and maintain your credibility. And by you stretching too far, or trying to get your witness to stretch too far, or being unfair to a witness on cross-examination, you're eating into that credibility. So you want to keep it high from your opening on forward. You want to keep your credibility at a maximum. Not because juries just be like, I like that lawyer more, or I believe that lawyer more, therefore they win no matter what the evidence is, but because you can only hurt your client's case by stretching your credibility. And I just think that's you always try to be that person in real life, but that's how you should be in the courtroom too. I think it's really important.
You mentioned earlier this concept of finding your own voice through trial and finding your own style. And for whatever reason, what popped in my head was, the Beatles, John Lennon, if I remember right, said, when I first started, as a musician, I really just wanted to be like Chuck Berry. So I was just like sing like Chuck Berry. And then he worked with this really skilled producer who just really said, no, like go in that booth and like, I want you to sing this song like you would, and just really trained him to find his own voice in that way. What's the process like for you as a trial? Like, do you feel like, has there been some consistent practice that you've used that have steered you in the right direction? Is there some moment you recall or some trial where you feel like, hey, like I just made a breakthrough in discovering my approach, my style? Tell me about that.
It's really been a process of working on it and refining it, trial after trial. And I've been really lucky. I mentioned this earlier. I've seen some just wonderful lawyers. And I've seen the way they work. I've seen their style. I've seen their approach. I've seen what works and what hasn't worked for them. And I try to embody some of those principles into kind of my approach. But then every trial, it gets better. Your voice gets sharper, your personality, like your approach to things gets a little bit stronger. And so, for me, it's been kind of looking at other people and then saying like, who am I? Who is my personality? What is my real personality? And like, look, everybody tempers their personality a bit for trial, but trials are long and they're arduous, and you cannot hide who you are. In that, like the true you is going to come out in some way. So like there are lawyers on our team that are super effective because they are very like, they're methodical. They're, it's very, militaristic in some way. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, their voice, their tone is pretty flat. Their back and forth is like a game, is like Pong, right? It works really well. If everybody on the team did that, it's not going to work really well.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So you can probably tell just based on this conversation, there's a little bit more flavor, a little bit like, because since we're this Hispanic lore, I guess, like there's a little more spice, in my presentation style. You have to know when to moderate that. Like you have to know when to pull that back. And you have to know when to turn it up. And, my voice changes a little bit more. I tend to smile more when I feel like there's a good point that we just made. Not because I'm like happy about it, which I am, but because I want the jury to see. Sometimes the jury doesn't know there's been a great point made, right? They're like, wait, I want to go back and listen to that. Why was Mr. Kaba smiling?
Right.
Right. So there's a little bit more of that flavor, in my style. I'll tell you that first jury trial, that we had, I had, this was when I was an associate and I had these witnesses, and the forewoman, came to me after the trial, and she said to me, again, this is nothing substantive. She said, I just loved when you were up there. And I said, oh, that's so nice of you. And she said, yeah, she said, you were so sharp and spicy. And I just, it's not all, it doesn't always work, and you definitely don't want to always be spicy, but I just took that because I was like, I think I was a little bit spicy at some moments during that trial, but you can't start off that way. That's my point. You have to build the credibility to get there. Right. So at the beginning, you just have to be perceived as the truthful teller of the facts, to the jury. But then, yeah, you're like, who you are comes through. And I think everybody would say that, there's a little bit more flair in my style. But it's been okay so far.
Yeah, I was in trial opposite of Bill Lee at Wilmer, and he had that more like that flat style you're describing, and more like Pong is such a great description for it. I didn't get it. I had to believe that everyone said this is a really effective style. So I'm so glad you said that, hey, like there's different styles that work. There's not any one. And I think that's really good advice. I mean, I don't know if you consider Walk Till Big Firm. Of course, it punches outside of its class. But at a truly big firm, I think, the process is a lot more about standardization and having, kind of formulas. And like, everyone's expected to do, hey, you're supposed to be equally good at discovery as you are at, in fact, discovery and expert discovery and briefing and all these different aspects of work, to be good at all of them. And and kind of like, more of a standardized, presentation style, I think. And so, yeah, it's interesting to hear that, hey, really just, you gotta mix it up into your own thing. And it sounds like very early on, you got some feedback that, hey, doing your own thing, backed by substance, like you were saying, and earning it pays off.
Yeah. And it's a really good point that we've kind of navigated to at this point, right? Which is when you don't see people like you doing the things that you want to do, you kind of just pick someone else and you're like, maybe that's the way it ought to be done. And you can have a tendency to want to lose a bit of who you are to match who you think you ought to be. And it takes hark it back to something we were talking about. It takes some boldness to say, no, I think I'm going to be who I am. I'm going to deploy my personality in the right way, but I'm not going to be a lesser version of me. If I have some tonal flares, I need to make them work for my client and for what I'm saying to the jury. So like, yeah, we're all professionals. You have to come into things with like the right approach, and you have to know what environment you're in, what context you're in. But I think it's really important to be true to who you are and your background and your perspective, and that our juries reflect a true rich diversity of the communities in which we're living, and their experiences and what they bring to the table and how they react to things, right, is very important. And if everybody's singing the same song in the same tune at the same time, there's nothing for people to latch onto that might be like, oh, that's an interesting point. I might want to pay more attention to that. So I think like the best analogy I can think for like a really effective trial team is an orchestra, where there are different instruments, but they all kind of come together in harmony, and each of us is our instruments. And I guess like my point being, like, if you play the violin, like if that's your thing, just play the violin, just do it really, really well. You don't have to play the trombone because everybody else is playing the trombone, right? And I think that for people like us and for South Asian lawyers, kind of, we may have our own styles and we have things that we bring to our approach and delivery from our backgrounds or upbringings, whatever it may be. Like, I would just urge people not to lose that. Just make that work for you in the context, in a trial context.
You mentioned, so of course you've had this great relationship with John Hueston, and so now you're the managing partner at the firm where he's a named partner. And I can imagine if he wanted to keep the firm in his vision, and just run it the way that he wants to, he would just remain managing partner. So there's a reason why you're a managing partner. So clearly you are adding you're playing some instrument or some tune different than John. You kind of emphasize the ways that you guys have come up together and trained together. What are the departures or different styles, either to trial work or managing a firm from John?
So interestingly, John has never been our managing partner. Brian Hennigan, the other part of Hueston Hennigan, was our managing partner for our first 8 years. I like to describe our partnership as like the U.S. Senate, in that everyone has the same vote. We try to do a lot of things by consensus in terms of our approach to the firm. And the managing partner basically is like one among many, but yes, you in some respects can set the agenda, and yes, you have a level of influence perhaps that because the partners elect the managing partner, right? And so they entrust you with making key decisions for the firm and opining on things that matter to the practice, that matter to the people, that matter to our contributions to the profession. John, Brian, so many of my partners here, and I can name all of them because they all add something pretty unique to our practice, and they add something I think that is really helpful for our clients. They've all been mentors for me, even the ones that are more junior to me in many ways. Like I try to go into every case with them, and worked with all of them, with an open mind to learn something about how they want to do things or what they think works. John in particular has been just a wonderful example of being a successful trial lawyer. He's been doing it for longer than I've had, and he's had really wild success. And he has, in so many instances, created, when I told you earlier about bringing a seat to the table, he has brought that seat to the table for me. And so we're not just partners, not just, is he the name partner? I'm the managing partner of this firm. Not just have we been at the firm from our founding and growing it together, but we are also really close friends. And that's what makes the practice so much fun. Like, I always tell him, like, I want to do every trial. Like, let's do every trial together. It's not possible just because we have so many cases and so many clients, and I got to do some, he's got to do some, Marshall and Allison and Doug and Vicky, all of Christy and Joe, they all have to do some on their own. But it's fun. It's really fun to practice law when you're doing it with people that you consider friends and mentors and just good people. And so, that's, I think that's part of it. But yeah, anybody who's seen us in action, I think will tell you we have different styles. They just happen to complement and work well together.
So, I've heard a lot about the successes you've had at trial. But tell me about some of the more challenging moments. So tell me about, was there, I didn't hear, maybe it's in the first trial, maybe it's another trial. What's the moment that you had the most fear or anxiety or you had your heart in your throat? Like, what's the moment in which you felt that at a trial? Or have you never felt that?
I think, well, no, I mean, I certainly have felt that. And I don't know if it's, I don't think it's fear. But I think it's concern. And if you are not concerned or kind of spun up before you're going to trial, then we should be really thinking about what you're doing, because I have that feeling in every trial. I have that feeling every day. Every day I walk into that courtroom, I have like a knot in my stomach because I'm like, oh my God, this is what's going to drive me to make sure this day goes really, really well. Right. And so that happens every single time. I was talking to one of my associates the other day who was like, oh my God, you seem so comfortable in court. You seem so comfortable, doing this, arguing this, or taking this witness or whatever. And I said, wow, like that's like, I'm putting on a good show, because every day, every time, I took a deposition 2 days ago of the key witness for the other side in a case. And I had a knot in my stomach throughout the entire deposition because I was like, I gotta get this. I really need these clean admissions, which we got. But it's a part of what drives at least me. And yes, it is probably unnecessarily stressful because I do not have it in me to turn it off and say, whatever happens will happen, right? Like, I just don't have that skill. I don't, and my husband says I don't have that setting on my dial. But I think it's what makes, it's what made me, at least in some respects, so driven, I guess, is this desire, like, constantly be like, okay, these 10 things going to go wrong, so let's make sure we're prepared for none of those 10 things to go wrong. Just going back to that first trial, I had, my very first witness in that trial, who was the first witness of the trial, was not a witness we controlled. It was a third party witness. He said something that was completely unexpected and not very good for us. And in that moment, it was like my first trial witness, right? As an associate with like all these people watching, I had a knot in my stomach, but I had thought through, like, okay, I'm going to move to the next thing. I'm not going to dwell on it. Why am I not dwelling on it? Because nobody else probably noticed what happened there, what he said. And I have no control over him. He's going to say whatever he thinks he wants to say. But I learned 2 lessons. One of them is that just as important as it is to know what questions to ask is to know what questions not to ask of a witness at trial. That was a lesson I learned in that moment. where I got out, as a young associate, a little ahead of my skis. But the other one is nothing. There's nothing so fatal that happens. And if you move on, everybody else moves on too. And, the people I was working with, my team knew what happened, but their reaction to it was like, that's great. We handled that really well. Like I don't even remember the question and answer anymore. Right. Like that's how insignificant it ended up being in the grand scheme of things. But, you use every one of these opportunities to learn something, and you learn from your colleagues, you learn from your client, you learn from the other lawyers. That's what I try to do still.
I think it's true that you've never lost a trial, at least as lead trial counsel. But I think that aside, I think maybe never lost a trial, period.
Knock on wood. Yes, that is correct. But I think every great trial lawyer, you can't be afraid of losing. You have to give it your all to win. But you can't be afraid of the loss, because then you're never gonna. It is actually something I talk to John about a lot, and we talk about amongst our partnership a lot. We take on really, really tough cases. That's kind of the point. That's our practice, right? So like, if you're gonna take on the tough cases, your willingness to take them on means that you have to be prepared that it's not gonna all go your way, but you got to fight every day, every single day, to make it go your way. So. The real lesson for me, I think the real lesson for folks who are maybe listening, is you can't be afraid to lose, because then you're not going to take on the hard cases and really challenge yourself. And, some losses are inevitable, but let's put them off for as long as possible.
Well, okay. So I've never broken a bone, right? And so, it's really common for kids to break bones. And so now at this point, the idea of breaking a bone sounds like terrifying to me. I'm just like, I can't wrap my head around what that would look like. And to your point, I think, you can't, the wrong reaction should be, well, now I just have to stay in my bedroom for the rest of my life. Like, obviously I have to expose myself to stressors, consistent stressors, to challenge my body, strengthen my bones, all that stuff. But I guess I don't particularly have a very good game plan for what would I break my shin? Like, how am I going to react to that? Because I'm sure it'd be like an emotional thing, like, is my leg ruined, and whatever variety of things. How do you're a preparer, and it seems to me one of the preparer things you would prepare for is losing a trial. So how do you, like, what is your mindset, or how do you frame that? Like, how are you prepared for that?
Because you have to accept that not everything is in your control. And a judge.
How are you doing it? Like, how?
Look, the most important thing is feeling good about what you've done in that courtroom, right? So the most important thing is every single day is never finding yourself content with just having had a good day. You don't want to just have a good day. You want to have a good week, and you want to have a good month, right? One of the things we talk about here is we want to win every day. We want to try to go in and win every day. And that's why, even after some of the hardest parts of trial are the middle of it, where you feel like, man, we killed it for the last 2 weeks. And okay, we can, by the time you get towards the end, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. But it's that middle part where you're like, wow, we really killed it for the last 2 weeks. But then you're like, we cannot rest on that. We got to kill it this week too, right? We cannot let go when you get into kind of the drudgery of the trial. A lot of lawyers kind of put witnesses into the middle that could go up, down, left, or right, sideways. But you can't get lazy in a trial intellectually, creatively, strategically, analytically, and kind of continuing to push through that. And at the end of the day, what we talk about with our trial teams, like what we look, we get around and we talk together. We talk every night. We talk with it at the end of a trial. We'll talk and we say, did we feel like we put on our best case? If you feel that way, then you can be more prepared for it. It hurts and it stings and it's something that you never want to repeat again, but you can be prepared for it because you feel like we put on our best case. What we cannot do and what we cannot be prepared for is if we made self goals, if there were footfalls, if there were errors that were within our control, like unforced errors, then you don't feel good about it. And so what I like to think about is put everything you can in putting on the best case. And then a jury may not agree with you and a judge may not agree with you. But what you've got to think about is, but did I do the best? Did we do the best that we could do? And then if you don't win something, I think you have to, you sort of have to, yes, you sulk and you're sad and you're unhappy for a while. And that's natural. But then I think you have to turn around and think to yourself, okay, what might we learn from this experience? Like, how do we avoid this? How do we avoid this again? So I don't know if I can, I don't know if there's a playbook for how to deal with that. But I think part of what we do and part of what we do with our associates here is think about like, how did we perform in the things that we control? And by the way, one of the things we do at our firm is even when we lose, like when you win a trial, we all get the whole firm. We do these firm-wide talks where people talk about like, what did I learn from this trial? Like what's a great thing that we saw? What's a great event that happened? Like, so everybody can learn from that experience. But we do that if we lose a trial too, we get together and we talk about what did we learn? And we congratulate the trial team. And we talk about their personal sacrifices. And we talk about, what if we had done this thing or what if we had done it that way? We use every opportunity to just become better lawyers, which I think is like just important to continue growing, at least our firm and our practice.
Mm-hmm. The trial work it's just so damn hard. And like you said, there's lots of talented trial lawyers. And you mentioned this concept of winning every day. And in a previous conversation, you mentioned this concept about working other lawyers. How do you do that? I mean, like, the universe of people that are operating at your level, it's a small universe and they're all people who worked really hard, went to great schools or maybe they didn't go to great school, but they worked really hard and, they think really, they think as creative as they can. What is the edge that you have? I mean, among people that are working comparably hard and comparably talented, how do you find your edge?
It has nothing to do with me, and it's the people that I work with. Like all day, every day, 7 days a week, I will tell you that it is the other partners I work with, the associates I work with, and the staff that I work with who are relentless when we are in trial, relentless about uncovering that last nugget, figuring out that last little thing that's going to set us apart from the other side. And I do think, and this kind of goes back to things that I was talking about earlier, trials are a team sport. Like you have to all be working together and you have to be able to rely on each other. And, yes, you often think about it like, yeah, but there's like the one person talking like that. You're the person that did the examination. You're the person that did the opening or the closing. But it's like this whole group of people that we work with. And I've just been really, really lucky at my firm that I work with just exceptional people, from the partnership, to the attorneys, and to the staff. And then you have to take that work and you kind of make it your own, and you use it and you kind of add your perspective and you do a lot of editing and a lot of kind of organizing around that. But I think it's in many respects, the edge is the other lawyers and staff at Hueston Hennigan. And I think in some respects, at least, it is a bit of luck.
So, okay, we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but so there's this running theme of boldness now. And some of it was tied to the things that you didn't know that were possible. And I think boldness is very related to ambition. And so tell me, what's the story of ambition until today? Like, like what, I think it kind of maybe begins in law school when you first really got motivated to really understand, okay, well, here's really my potential. I'm starting to grasp my potential in a way I hadn't been exposed before. Your high school counselor said, hey, you should, work in the trades or something like that, which would be fine, but, maybe you wouldn't have realized your potential. What's the story about, ambition, and maybe if there's like a y and x axis, y axis is level ambition and x axis is time. Like what does that chart look like until from law school till today?
Yeah, I guess I think you have to go back a little bit before law school. And I don't know that I would describe it as ambition as much as necessity, which perhaps is a more primal form of ambition. But
is the mother of ambition. Sounds like.
Yeah, there you go. Necessity is the mother of ambition. Exactly. Or at least like the friendly aunt. So I think we've talked about it a little bit. I'm really proud of my roots and my upbringing, but growing up in Chicago and uh, not having a lot of resources to rely on, but being a part of a community, really made me feel like I've got to do more than, whatever my parents, my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles did. And for me, I really remember when I was like looking at college and then deciding to go to law school, I had a singular goal, and it was not to be some famous, successful person or even to be like a trial lawyer or a winning lawyer. I had one goal, and my one goal was to buy my dad a Jaguar, because all growing up, my dad drove taxi cabs. Everywhere we went, he drove a taxi cab. When I was dropped off to Cornell, we did not have the money to buy me a plane ticket. My dad drove his taxi from Chicago to Ithaca, New York to drop me off. I just always remember like, I've got to do something for my dad. And like, what am I going to do? And it just seemed to make sense to me that you could go to law school. And if I could get into a law school, I was going to go. And then one day I'm going to buy my dad a Jaguar, and I'm going to buy my dad and my mom tickets to go back to Pakistan, where they could go back and they could do nice things for their family. It had really nothing to do with like any ambition other than I didn't want to grow up with the limited resources that I had growing up. I didn't want my future to be restricted in that way. And I wanted my parents to be able to enjoy at least some of the incidents of having been in America for, 20 plus years, at that point. And so that is really what was driving me. And it's so, in some respects, like you look back on it, it's so unfulfilling that there was no greater altruistic or professional purpose, but there really wasn't. And then I just kind of like, I fell into these things in some respects. And it's so weird to talk about. Like the guy on the subway told me, go work at this firm. So I went and worked at that firm. Somebody said, you should go clerk if you can clerk. And I thought, okay, let me go clerk. Where should I clerk? And I thought, hey, I've never been to LA. I never live in LA. I'm definitely not a Californian. So I was like, I'll try to go clerk in Pasadena. Flew out, clerked in the Ninth Circuit. Then I was like, all right, I'm going to go back to New York and work at this law firm because that's what one does. And like throughout this, and then I got put on cases and I got to work with people. And I was like, wow, the first thing I did when I got to Wachtell after my clerkship was go to trial. Which is a very rare thing in the New York legal market, to go to trial. And I went to trial in Delaware, before, at the time, Vice Chancellor Strine, who has since left the bench. And I got to, one of the trial witnesses was the witness that I got to depose. And I just like, wow, this is exciting. This is fun. Like, let's do more of this, right? Then, despite my earlier protestations, my then boyfriend, now husband, was like, let's move to California. That was a great year that we had when you were in LA. So I was like, all right, let's move to California. I went to IRL. I started working with people, got to go to more trials. And then I thought, like, I really love doing this. I really love the feeling of working with people so closely. And I want to be like that. I want to be a great trial lawyer. I want clients to call with their hardest cases, their most intellectually challenging or factually complex cases. And I want to represent them, and I want to figure out how to tell their stories to judges and juries. And so that's been like a huge part of the career has just been that, right? It's like working with a group of people that decided to start their own law firm. Like how does that happen? When does that happen? And we did it. And we've just been really lucky, and, really, hopefully hard work and a little bit of skill plays a part in that. But, all of that has really, I don't have that same need I do anymore, to get the Jaguar or to send my parents to Pakistan, for vacation. But now it is really, about like continuing to just do really great work and work with really great people and kind of help other people here have those experiences, like get them. There's something so rewarding for us who have been partners at this firm for a while about seeing kind of our younger, more junior lawyers like have like that light bulb moment in trial where they're like, wow, this is awesome. Like, I want to do this. When they get to cross-examine or direct examine their first witness and they're like, this was amazing, I want more. That is just incredibly rewarding.
So I think there's two possibilities, and maybe both can be true at this stage. Okay, so you've accomplished so many things by now, and now you're the managing partner of this, 10-year-old, trial boutique, and with this string of wins. There's two possibilities from here. One is, and both can be true. One is your response is, I've done so much, and so this is going to make me a little more conservative in some sense, because how much higher can I go? I'm the managing partner. I'm working with, all the people that I ever care about, and we're growing, and I'm adding new partners to my team and training up these associates, like you're saying. I have, how much better can it get from here is one way to look at it. So there's a risk of loss. On the other hand, at this point, you're playing with house money. Like, hey, you know what? I've accomplished beyond what I could even conceive of. My greatest ambitions was to get this Jaguar, which, you can by now. So are both true? Is one true? Tell me about how you see it.
I certainly do not believe I've accomplished everything that is accomplishable. I feel like, another feature.
Yeah, but I mean, you've done so much. By any reasonable stretch, you've done so much.
Yeah. But look, there's a thing, it's been written about extensively, this whole like imposter syndrome idea where, you just, and I catch myself in this all the time where I'm like, but is this all just serendipity and luck, or is this something real? Like, is there a skill that underlies all of this, or have I really just consistently been in the right place at the right time? So there is this constant, like, you gotta prove yourself. You gotta win, right? There's no having won in this profession. There is always winning, I think. Perhaps I need like deep and long therapy for that, but that's the way I think about it. I'll tell you two things that really motivate me today. One of them is, we're now at 80 lawyers. We'll probably be at 90 lawyers this year, at our firm, with offices in Southern California and New York. And I just think it's so important for us to build a firm worthy of a legacy. And that is not something you do in 10 years. And that's not something you do with just having, done what we have done as a group here. There are 90 lawyers and many staff members who have entrusted us with their future, professional future, at least, right? Their career. We still are getting incredibly interesting cases from our clients that we want to deliver on. And so for me, it's just like, there is no, like, it's neither being conservative nor being like, I've got house money. It's like, no, we're actually still in the process of building this building. And so let's make sure all of the floors that go above are just as good, if not better, than the floors that are below. And it not just for us, but for everybody else who's occupying the space. And so that, I think about that a lot. And that's a big part of what motivates me even today professionally is the clients and the people that I'm working with. But the other thing we did as a law firm, which I know, Grom, you and I have talked about before, is we decided to start this foundation, this kind of public interest foundation called the Social Justice Legal Foundation. And the Social Justice Legal Foundation is attempts to do for public interest issues what we do for kind of private clients, which is take on cases and try to create good precedent. And so what the Social Justice Legal Foundation does, which is entirely funded by our law firm, right? So it doesn't seek any outside funders. It's a group of really great recent law school graduates from a handful of schools that are fellows. It's led by a wonderful lawyer, South Asian lawyer. Her name is Sarah Haji, and a group of professional, full-time attorneys. And they take on right now, they've got, 3 or 4, to be more accurate, cases where they are pursuing criminal justice reform or the protection of immigrants being held in detention, for example. So there's just like some really interesting cases that they're taking on. And that's a kind of like a fun new dimension of the practice, right? Which is working on cases that may have some lasting social impact beyond kind of wrapping up, getting your bill paid and moving to the next matter. So those are the two things that I sort of think about. And like, look, by the way, I'm 42. Like, there's no resting at 42. Like there's at least some time left on this runway, where, I've got more things to do.
Well, do you have any sense for, when you talk about the future trajectory of the firm and the impact that you want to make? What do you picture when you picture? Like, is there some predecessor you look to say that firm had an impact, a lasting impact as a trial fatigue? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there are a number of firms that have just been really, become real cornerstones of the legal community, right? I mean, that are not 200 years old, right? I mean, we talked about one. I mean, Wachtell Lipton is not that old of a law firm, but they came onto the market. They filled a need, and they're remarkable in how they did that. Quinn Emanuel is another example. It's not the same model that we have. They're much larger than I think we would ever want to be. But that's a firm of a relatively recent vintage that has accomplished great things. I mean, there are other examples of this. Sussman Godfrey, Kecker Van Ness, Bartlett Beck. I mean, there are some of these firms that I think they've just done really great things over a long period of time, and I think really added a lot of breadth to like the availability of law firms out there, and great law firms. And so for me, I think like, yeah, we're 10 years old. I like to think we play in the big leagues, and we want to keep doing that so that 20, 30, 40 years from now, when like the leadership of the firm looks entirely different than it does now, people are still like, oh my God, that's a Hueston Hennigan lawyer. Like, we better watch out. Like, we better bring our A game when we're going up against the Hueston Hennigan lawyer. And then look, at a more personal level, there are really some extraordinary South Asian lawyers out there. I mean, we've talked about some of them, Neil Kachal or Judge Srinivasan or Paul Gurwal. I mean, there are just some really fantastic, accomplished legal luminaries out there. The U.S. Attorney, Hamdani, like, you're talking about people who have accomplished great things and will leave a legacy just because of having done that, and because of their contributions in the spaces in which they operate. And so for me, I look up, by the way, I know none of them personally, but, I look up to them, and I feel like having built such respect for themselves in the spaces that they occupy is something that I would like to do, in kind of the little space that I occupy.
Mm-hmm. So, and I interviewed Paul and I interviewed Alumdar, so you can listen to those another time. I'll send them listening points too. But so, okay, I want to pick up on the South Asian part soon. But when you're talking about legacy, you're already making headlines today. And, I think the thing about impact is that I think, society perceives you in a certain way. And so I want to make this a venue and a format for you to react to some of the headlines because you have maybe the most colorful or unique headlines that I've written about you that I've ever seen about any trial lawyer. So maybe two sets of headlines. I want your reaction to them. Okay, so the first one, there's an article about you. Moez Kaba, a first-generation Pakistani Muslim, reps clients from the LGBT community to a Koch brother.
Yeah. Well, it's accurate. It is an accurate headline. And, I think that headline, it speaks a bit to my practice, but at least my practice at that time. But I think it also speaks a little bit to the uniqueness of who I am. I think people want to write stories about unique things. That headline was pretty early in my career though. So I feel like I didn't have too much else, that I could say the headline should be about.
Okay. All right. So I think a more recent one, Hueston Hennigan, his first South Asian Muslim openly gay chief.
Yes, also true. So factually accurate headline. That's a more recent one. And look, I respect the framing of it, right? Because it's I think for many a historical thing for our firm at least. And there aren't that many South Asian managing partners. There are not that many gay managing partners. A dear friend of mine, somebody who I just think is a fantastic accomplished lawyer, Kalpana Srinivasan, who's the co-managing partner at Sussman Godfrey, is one of the South Asian managing partners out there, but you don't hear about a ton of them. And so I think there is meaning to highlighting the unique demography of someone, right? And for people who are reading that to say, wow, like I'm an openly gay person who's entering the law. I'm a South Asian person who's entering the law. Like I'm both of those things. I'm a Muslim. I'm, whatever. I come from a modest background, et cetera. I think there is a lot of power that comes from perception, basically. That is, I can see myself in you. And so in that respect, I think it's really important. My other reaction to that and kind of some of the similar, like very demography oriented headlines is that it can be it can sort of take you, a beat to understand why that is the only framing as opposed to just one of the framings, right? So for me, all of those things are very much a part of who I am and have contributed to who I am today. But I've also gone to trial a lot. I'm also a trial lawyer and not just like I went to a trial. By the time I became managing partner, I'd done many trials. And so that could just as easily have been a headline about being a trial lawyer. Hueston Hennigan elects its next trial lawyer as managing partner or whatever. And that feels a bit more tied to the merits of your accomplishments as relevant to the role than the newness of who you are as relevant to the role. And so I think that we have to embrace, and I do, and I think most people do, embrace who we are in terms of like our perspective, what we bring to the table in terms of our life experiences. But I think it's also important to not allow us to be defined first and foremost by my my ethnic background, my sexual orientation, etc. Right? Like you don't read that. I mean, I looked at some other articles where I saw the headlines and it was like such and such, who, blank's lawyer, new managing partner or whatever. Like you don't really see that unless there's like something new about the person who's gotten the role, namely like they're of a different race, they're of a different sexual orientation, etc. So that's my very long answer to say I'm very appreciative for the attention. And I just hope that as we kind of progress as a society, the merit is given as much attention as the novelty.
Do you feel that, so with the first headlines, he's pointing out, LGBT, representation as well as, and sorry if I'm not pronouncing it right, I think it's pronounced Koch, maybe I'm wrong. Is there something novel about that, those are two fairly different, my understanding is those are two fairly different groups of politics. And so, is there some novelty about that? And maybe the bottom line is I'm a trial lawyer. I like trials. I like complex cases, difficult cases. Maybe that's the end of the story. Or, hey, you know what? Honestly, we get paid. And so, that's the answer. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's one of the Koch brothers. And it wasn't a particularly political case. Actually, that was the case that I was talking about, the trial that I did in New York. That early on case. It was for Bill Koch, one of the Koch brothers. And it certainly is not like, we get paid, we do the work. That's never been our approach. Frankly, our law firm turns down cases all the time. We turn down clients who are willing to pay whatever the rates are all the time, partly because we're busy and partly because we may not want to do that work. That doesn't feel like the kind of fulfilling work that we're doing, that we would like to do. But, I think the purpose of that article was a little bit about explaining the kind of the breadth of the type of clients. So the LGBT interests I have for of basically my entire career, chosen pro bono matters that are close to me in some way, right? So I'm an openly gay man, so I've done pro bono work that is connected to LGBT rights and equality. I'm the son of immigrants, so I've done pro bono work connected to getting and establishing and protecting the rights of immigrants in America. I'm a Muslim, so I've done pro bono work designed to help protect Muslims. So I've in that range, I have fought for and argued legally for marriage equality and employment non-discrimination for LGBTQIA people. In the middle ground, I had a pro bono case where we sued the U.S. Department of Justice because they had shut down an immigration hotline that people that were being held in immigrant detention could call for free to get legal services. And that had gotten shut down because people in immigration detention actually have less rights in some respects than people that are in prison, because they don't even get that phone call, that free phone call, which is a case that we filed and won here in the Central District. And then on the Muslim front, I have fought and frankly to defend an anti-bullying initiative. There was an initiative passed in the San Diego School District that basically said, like, there's a real problem with bullying Muslim kids, and so we want to make sure that we're paying special attention to that problem, and we want to educate our students about, for example, Eid. Right. So like if people fasting, like that's not something you should be bullied about, because a lot of times you would hope that educating people will help make them less bigoted. One can hope. And so there was a group that challenged that initiative. And so the school district had a timid response to that challenge. And we were retained pro bono, and we fought to protect that initiative, and to say that initiative was not only constitutional, but actually entirely consistent with the California Constitution. And we won that case. So in that respect, a lot of my work, my pro bono work, has been tied to these very specific personal identity things. And I think that's what that article was kind of touching at on the one end. And then I'm sure there was a little bit of an attempt to kind of make the Coke representation seem like the other, but it wasn't in that case. That was a representation about, it was a fraud case. It was a fraud and contract case, which actually the longer story about that representation is very interesting. It's been written about in books, and it's been Netflix has done documentaries. There's a book called Billionaire's Vinegar, that was about this. It was about, fraud in the high end wine market. Yes. And I understand my father, if he were still alive today, thinking that his son is talking about the real scourge of counterfeit wines in that $25,000 plus per bottle market, would be shocked. But it was a real problem, and our client's case, and really that win that we had at that trial, and then some appellate wins that we had, really helped turn and clean up that market quite a bit.
So in the Netflix documentary, or the biopic, who do you want to play you?
Oh my God, who do I want to play me? I don't like, hopefully some South Asian actor, but here's the problem. There are not that many to pick from, are there? Someone, who am I thinking of?
Your answer is you play it yourself.
I play myself. Yeah. Let me fit that into the schedule. Let me play myself. I actually, Riz Ahmed. How about that? He's a great, talented Pakistani actor.
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah.
So, okay. So this theme of, not enough South Asian representation keeps coming up. And, we certainly have, some forebears to our generation. You mentioned a bunch of them, very impressive, and they were kind of the pioneers. And now, we're in a different boat now, and we're still up and coming. And so, but there's still another generation coming up behind us. But maybe I'll start with maybe not enough, we talk about people that are ahead of us. We talk people that we mentor, but maybe not enough we talk about peers. What is it that you want your peers to know about the practice, or raising our ambitions as a community, or coming together? Like, what do you want? What message do you have for your peers?
What a good question. Not something I think about often enough, I'm sure. But I think there's a lot of power in acting collectively and thinking about how do we support one another, and how do we support younger lawyers that are coming up through the system, and through law schools and clerkships and whatnot. And so what I should be doing more of is connecting with my South Asian peers, and talking about how do we make meaningful differences, and just keep these connections. They will inure to our benefit, I'm sure, in ways that we don't yet know. I find it like it's always interesting to me, because there's so many communities in which, like, even my colleagues, like, here, where they're like, oh yeah, I know this person from like high school. We went to high school together. Now this is what they're doing. And like, yeah, I can call that client up. I've got a connection there, because, we were in the Federalist Society together, or whatever the case may be. Right. And you have these connections, and it used to be like, it was like, yeah, I know this person because we golf together, or we're in the country club together, or whatever. And I think that has been the model for some lawyers, to great success, to great, like, client, generation success. And I think that, something that, South Asian lawyers should be doing even more of. I think what you're doing is a great model of this. I think what Saba and other organizations are doing is a great model of this, is creating that community, and understanding that there are ways that we can and should help each other and help others. And so, yeah, I guess that would be my primary message, is like, let's seek out opportunities to work with each other, and for things towards things that we care about, and they don't always have to be structured. But as I say that, I fully acknowledge and understand that, I am part of the problem because I'm not doing enough of that myself. What's that old, like, the call is coming from within the house or whatever. So I get that. It's something.
I see the flip side of that, the glass half full, which is you are contributing to the solution by being part of it. If my podcast is part of the solution, well, you're on the podcast and you are the solution.
Yeah, there we go. See how you just turned that around? I can see.
I've learned from you that, that's when you stop talking. So I'll just stop right there. This is great, man. I'm so glad we did this.
I am too. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. And, really, I'm very impressed with what you're doing. So keep doing it.
Thanks, man.